Hello and welcome everybody to ICMDA webinars. I'm Dr. Peter Saunders, the Chief Executive of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association, which brings together about 60,000 Christian doctors and dentists from over 100 affiliated national movements worldwide. And today on ICMDA webinars, our 201st webinar since we started back in COVID times, we have our old friend, Professor John Wyatt, back, who's going to speak to us on the subject of AI, artificial intelligence in medicine, a Christian perspective. So, artificial intelligence is everywhere, it seems, and as though science fiction fantasies are starting to come true. It's hard to separate the hype from the reality, but analysts predict that deploying AI in healthcare should save hundreds of thousands of lives every year and also dramatically reduce healthcare costs in developing countries. At the same time, many countries with less established health infrastructure are starting to see the remarkable potential of bespoke AI systems. What are the ethical, societal, and spiritual issues which lie behind these extraordinary developments, and how can we as Christians prepare for the coming wave of AI innovation and disruption? Well, Professor John Wyatt is no stranger to ICMDA. John is Emeritus Professor of Neonatal Pediatrics at University College in London, a senior researcher at the Faraday Institute in Cambridge, and also president of the UK Christian Medical Fellowship, which is ICMDA's affiliated national group in the UK. He's got a background as a pediatrician caring for sick and premature infants, and also as a medical scientist researching into the prevention of brain injury in newborn babies. He's always been interested in ethical dilemmas raised by advances in medical technology and has frequently engaged in public and professional consultations and debates from the perspective of the Christian faith. His book, Matters of Life and Death, Human Dilemmas in the Light of the Christian Faith, has been translated into more than 10 languages. And his most recent book is on transforming friendship, but he's also written on AI as well. John and his wife Celia are long-standing members of All Souls Church in London. John, such a pleasure to have you back here on yet another subject, and we really look forward to hearing what you have to say and to engaging with you in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. It's a real privilege for me to be here and take part in this session. And yes, we're going to talk about and think about artificial intelligence and the new challenges that this is raising. So this is a fascinating, rapidly changing topic. As we all know, there's a huge amount of hype and going on about AI, trying to work out what is science fiction, what is real, what are the implications for the future. These are very challenging and difficult questions, and certainly I don't have a very neat and slick and simple answer, but I hope in this session I can just illustrate some of the enormous challenges and potential benefits and risks that AI is posing for medicine, and then towards the end think about some specific Christian responses. And just by way of introduction, I think we need to look back in the history of technology and see that we should never underestimate the power and speed of disruptive technology. So on the left, you see Fifth Avenue in New York in 1900, where there is one car and all the rest are horse-drawn taxis. And the same street in 1913, they're all internal combustion engines. Well, on some electric taxis as well, but there's one horse-drawn taxi, and this shows the percentage of miles travelled in the States in that period. And back in 1900, nobody saw this coming, but that was the transformative power of the internal combustion engine of the car. And it's not the same story has been repeated many times. This is digital photography and the transition from film cameras, again, just taking place over a relatively short period of 10, 11, 12 years. And so then the question comes, is it possible that we might be about to see a similar kind of level of disruption due to artificial intelligence? And why is it that healthcare in particular seems to be one of the major targets for the technology revolution and the introduction of AI? And as we know, there are many different things going on here. The hardware is becoming much more powerful, and with developments in the mobile internet and wearables, this is now becoming easily accessible across the globe. At the same time, we're seeing huge advances in software, both in the ability to analyze data, but in particular with what are now called large language models, which we'll come back to, chatbots that are capable of understanding and creating a natural sounding human language. There's the accumulation of massive health data sets, and here the NHS is seen as a particularly attractive source, but all over the world, healthcare databases are being mined to generate data for the new AI. All the major companies have recognized healthcare as a huge potential and are piling in with massive commercial investments. And that's because of the potential profits, particularly in the USA, where healthcare is so incredibly expensive. There are massive potential profits. But around the world, healthcare is seen as a huge market. And it's also seen as ripe for automation because there are very high human staffing levels, lots of very inefficient practices, old-fashioned technology, and low productivity. And anyone who works in the National Health Service would recognize all of those factors and how the contrast between what's going on in the commercial world with online services such as Amazon and others, and you compare that with what's actually happening in the National Health Service and in other health services, and you just see the vast differences and how behind the times healthcare seems to be. And the fundamental argument is that tech-based, tech-infused, tech-dominated healthcare is always going to be better than the human-only version. And these are the fundamental factors behind technology and all technological revolutions. There's speed, accuracy, there's efficiency. You get more outcomes for every dollar, bigger bang for the buck. You get 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation without any problems about fatigue and decline. You get rapid scaling. So once you've made a program which works in one context, you can have 10, you can have 100, you can have 1,000, you can have 1,000,000, you can have 1 billion copies of that program. You can ensure that every person in the world has access to it. Now, that ability to scale is completely different, of course, from human. Think of how long it takes to train human health professionals. And although the tech companies will not say this much in public, yet in private, many people, managers and others, recognize it's humans that are the problem. It's the humans that bring inefficiencies, unpredictabilities. It's humans that create so many problems. And basically, if we can only remove the humans or minimize the human contribution, the long-term outcomes will be better. There's continual improvements in knowledge and accuracy. So these systems are constantly learning, constantly developing, constantly improving. Patient data is a unique resource for AI. AI depends on vast amounts of data. And the wonderful thing about healthcare from that point of view is that every patient is a great treasure trove of new data, which can be then uploaded into the systems. And we're reducing our dependence on expensive, inefficient, unpredictable, and uncontrollable human workers. And so it's not surprising that all the major tech companies are focusing on healthcare. And so we've got Microsoft, we've got Google, we've got OpenAI, we've got Apple, and we've got Amazon. And if you would wonder, what would it be like if Amazon was running the health service? Well, we're starting to get a glimpse of what it would be like. It's happening in the States. And in many ways, just as we know that Amazon and the rest of life can be amazingly efficient, imagine what it would be like if Amazon was running health services around the world. One contribution is particularly transcription. So using the latest language models, it's possible for these systems to monitor doctor-patient conversations and constantly, in real time, transcribe them and then analyze them, find the major points, summarize them, and so on. And this is already being introduced into a number of clinical settings where it basically means that doctors don't need to take written notes and transcripts. The digital system will do it. And as a result, the doctor can is saving significant time with each patient and can use that saved time in the interaction and rely on the technology to do the transcript and the analysis. And we're seeing these extraordinary phrases from people like Bill Gates and many others. And yes, undoubtedly, there's a great deal of hype here, but I think we also have to take seriously that many of these technologies have turned out to be right in the past, and therefore there's no reason to think that Bill Gates and others may not be right about artificial intelligence. And again, it's not surprising that training specialized systems for medical applications is now a major activity. And it's possible that some people on this call, when ChatGPT first came out, you tried it and you said, oh, well, it's quite good, but, it's not that brilliant. But the important thing to recognize is how fast the pace of improvement is taking place with these systems. As they are trained more efficiently, they become bigger, more sophisticated. And so this shows the improvement on a US medical licensing exam, and the latest version is now featuring significantly above the standard pass mark. Now, of course, that's not the same as working as a clinician, but it does show you the potential of these systems effectively being a repository of really sophisticated clinical knowledge, because this is performing extremely well on the sort of classical grey cases that are used in exams, particularly postgraduate exams, in order to test physicians on how deep their knowledge is, and surprisingly, these systems are doing remarkably well. So there are a huge number of startups in this field. This is one called Hippocratic AI, do no harm. And I've just taken this as an example, but we're focusing our research on how to make foundation models safe for healthcare. So this model is called Polaris. You can see it here on the left. The patient speaks, it takes the input then, but then it calls this very sophisticated system. There's a primary, all these are AI, it's what are called AI agents. They are software programs that are basically using the AI. So there's a primary agent that takes the data and then passes it on. And then we've got a checklist specialist, we've got a medication specialist, we've got labs and vitals, the laboratory, we've got the insurance and the payment, we've got privacy and compliance, we've got electronic health records, we've got nutrition, we've got human interventions. And all of these are separate AI agents within a complex system. Again, it just gives you an illustration of how much of the sophistication and complexity that is being built. And obviously the attempt is to make the entire process, this can take clinical information from patient, can then pass it on to these different software agents and then come back with a response to help the patient. Opportunistic screening is a fascinating development. It turns out that if you train a system to examine straight conventional chest x-rays, pixel by pixel, against the known outcomes, and so this system's been trained on hundreds of thousands of chest x-rays, it turns out that just using an AI system to screen chest x-rays can predict cardiovascular disease risk more accurately than the standard way of measuring cholesterol and blood pressure and so on. Simply from the chest x-ray alone, you can predict the 10-year risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death. So this is just an example of what is now called opportunistic screening. But of course, it raises the problem. Yes, we can get all that information. We can contact the patient and say, we've just looked at your chest x-ray again, and you've got this risk. What do we do with that information? How much should we be going in for this kind of opportunistic screening to warn people about the risks of different complications? Very promising area is in new antibiotics. So now these systems are capable of analyzing vast libraries of potential molecules and then detecting or identifying out of millions and millions of possible molecules a handful which might have new antibiotic properties. And this is already is now an antibiotic selected by AI, has been developed, is now entering clinical trials. So there's no doubt the whole area of drug discovery and pharmaceuticals is being transformed. I was intrigued by this idea, and this is a lot of big hospitals are now introducing what they're calling hospital command centers, looking very much like a, something on space, managing space program. But again, the idea being of allowing AI to tackle the fundamental logistics of very complex health systems to try to maximize efficiency. And it's not just in rich countries. So a whole number of startups in sub-Saharan Africa, India, Asia, and elsewhere are developing AI diagnostic systems and systems for monitoring health provisions and so on. Smartphone-based ultrasound combined with artificial intelligence is showing that even somebody who hasn't had a lot of training in ultrasound can use one of these systems together with AI as a very powerful handheld diagnostic device. And so we're seeing this convergence between smartphones, mobile internet, advancing AI, and massive healthcare databases. One of the developments that the NHS is now promoting is the idea of virtual wards. So instead of the patient being admitted to hospital, the patient is at home. The home is kitted out with remote monitoring devices. And then the clinical team in the hospital is monitoring 24/7 the patient. And then there's a community clinical team that will go and visit the patient and, if necessary, transfer the patient back to the hospital. So again, just showing how as this technology improves, it's opening up a whole series of possibilities that would have been completely impossible even 10 years ago. And so as you look at possible benefits, again, pretty obvious: diagnosis, image analysis, predicting, monitoring treatment, rare diseases, putting power into the patient's hands and democratizing expert knowledge. Given the power of these AI systems, which can be just made available via a smartphone, what will be the implications when almost everybody on the planet has access to that level of sophisticated diagnostic skill and capability? But of course, it's pretty obvious that all this involves a move away from individualized face-to-face relationships and what's sometimes called the decomposition of traditional professional roles. So instead of just accepting that this is what doctors do, this is what lawyers do, this is what an accountant does, what the technology does is it breaks down the job into a series of different tasks and then says, well, who's the best person or the best equipment to do that particular task. And I think it's only a matter of time before people will say, why are we spending 5 or 6 years training a human being in anatomy and physiology and biochemistry and pharmacology and so on and so on? Is that really appropriate in this modern world? Shouldn't we be training far more health data engineers, information technology specialists, maybe associate specialists? Yes, we're always going to need a few traditionally trained physicians, but I can see a lot of questions about the money, the time, the opportunity costs which go into traditional medical education. But of course, we need to ask about unintended consequences. What is being lost when we lose this traditional clinician role, when instead these roles are being decomposed into a whole series of other small fragments? And I think there's a obvious potential for massive commercial exploitation. These tech giants are all profit-based. They are seeing enormous profits in healthcare, and therefore there's no such thing as a free lunch. And is it possible that vulnerable people and even vulnerable countries and health systems are going to be exploited by the tech giants? There's a lot of worry about hidden bias in the data training sets, and particularly minorities, and maybe discriminated against. And how do we maintain quality control and product certification if this new technology is constantly evolving? There are huge regulatory and other problems. Interestingly, in healthcare ethics, we're starting to see some challenges. So it's been suggested that a conversational AI could be used to obtain informed consent for procedures, operations, and so on, and that maybe they do much better than some harassed junior resident who says, just sign this form. You know, people could have a leisurely conversation with about the risks and the why the operation is being done and so on. But rather more scary is this proposal, and that is that when you have an unconscious patient and you have a critical life or death decision, how do you work out what the patient preferences would have been? And the answer is we use an AI to go back into the patient's past medical history, but also to take all their text messages and everything they've ever said. And then the AI will tell us whether or not they would like to have the life support system switched off or so on. So again, you can see obvious questions and challenges of this kind of approach. And surprise, surprise, the idea of AI-assisted euthanasia has surfaced, that maybe this will be a solution, that we don't have to have the horrible guilt that we might be participating in the death of someone else, because after all, it's just the machine, and it's the machine that makes the decision. It's the machine that does the dirty work. So just to step back briefly, how do large language models work? And this is one of the most fascinating, but also, to be honest, quite troubling areas for me. And that is, it's causing everyone to think much more deeply about the nature of human language. And what is obvious when you think about it is that all human language takes the hidden abstract thoughts and meanings and emotions created inside our minds, and then encodes those thoughts in a sequence of arbitrary signs. And as you're listening to me, these thoughts which started in my mind have been encoded in my speech. You hear this sequence of signs, and then you turn them back inside your head and in your mind. And so now the same thoughts that started in my head are now in your head. In other words, all human speech has encoded these thoughts and meanings. And what is now becoming apparent is that large language models are increasingly capable of extracting those hidden thoughts, those meanings behind that are encoded in the word, and convert the thoughts into mathematical equations. So there are said to be about 50,000 words commonly used in the English language. And those 50,000 words are what these large language models are trained on. And yet they're capable of creating more than 1 trillion unique mathematical variables that reflect the hidden semantic connections and implications between those words. And just recently, the AI company Anthropic released a paper where they had tried using very sophisticated technology to work out how the systems work. Because basically these systems are black boxes. We don't really know. Nobody knows what's going on. But this graph represents a meaning space. It's multidimensional. It's put on a two-dimensional. It's actually you've got to mind-boggling think of this as a multidimensional framework. And every position in this graph represents a particular word or a particular collection of words or some kind of meaning from the words. And so they just happen to have looked at words which are related to immunity and immunology. And now remember, this model knows nothing about immunology. It has simply been trained on words. But as it has looked at all those words and analyzed them repeatedly, it has discovered these different relationships between the different words. And the closer they are together on this graph, the more closely related these concepts are. So things like antioxidants, immunosuppression, physiological receptors, lymph nodes, cancer immunotherapy, and so on. So there's a whole group to do with diseases. There's a whole group about immunocompromise, autoimmunity, and then, fascinatingly, legal or social immunity. So we know that there's a relationship between biological immunity and legal immunity, but they're not the same thing. And lo and behold, the AI has worked that out too. So it puts legal immunity closer to these other immunity words, but it's not quite the same. There's some link between them, but they're not the same. Anyway, this is just an illustration of the extraordinary sophistication that is now emerging in these models, of how they are able to somehow encode the deep meanings behind human words. And of course, from a Christian point of view, that makes us think again about language and its profound theological significance. That, of course, the God of the Bible is a God who speaks in human language in order to communicate his deepest thoughts. He encodes his deepest thoughts in a series of arbitrary signs in the Holy Scriptures. And of course, Christ is the Word, the Logos. The Holy Spirit breathes and inspires the words of Scripture. So language has a profound theological significance. Words matter. And so what is the theological significance that we now have these machines that seem to be delving deep into the significance and meaning of words? The technology is new and powerful and ubiquitous, but the entrenched power structures in which this technology comes out of is very old and very powerful. It's basically what's often called laissez-faire capitalism. Capitalism that is just based on greed and fear. And it seems to me it's almost like a new Manhattan Project. We know that during the Second World War, the American government in particular was worried that the Nazis were developing an atom bomb, and they took the best brains, they gave them an unlimited budget, and the best equipment they could provide, and said, solve this one problem, make a nuclear weapon. And it seems as though the same thing is happening now, except it's not driven by state power, it's driven by crude capitalism. Get the best scientific and technical brains, give them access to the best computing resources in the world, provide them with a virtually unlimited budget, and incentivize them to solve one problem. How do we create the world's first superintelligent AI system? And that seems to be what is going on in Silicon Valley. And what we've learned before from this kind of process is that when you have that concentration, that focus of resources, ultimately it's often successful. So coming to the end, where are we going? What are going to be the implications? Well, I think there's little doubt that we're going to be surrounded by chatbots, that healthcare is going to become increasingly to depend on very sophisticated, specialized chatbots. That's going to mean there's 24/7 availability, and there's going to be rapid access to critical information. Both patients and doctors are going to have instantaneous access to very sophisticated medical and related information. There's automated assistance, especially for people with chronic conditions, visual hearing impairments. Ultimately, these will reduce costs because they maximize efficiency. At least that's the hope. Fascinatingly, many patients seem to prefer chatbots compared with human beings. They're seen as non-judgmental, and some patients feel much more comfortable sharing medical information. And as the evidence is that many people find talking to a very sophisticated chatbot that has unlimited time to answer any of their questions more satisfying than having a short consultation with a very harassed human clinician. And behind all this is the whole question of, as the simulation of compassion and concern gets ever better, how much does authenticity matter? This is taken from a science fiction film, Westworld. Well, it was on American television, which is based in a theme park which is filled with very sophisticated humanoid robots. Still science fiction at the moment, although they're coming. And a real human being comes to the theme park for the first time, and this woman comes up to him and asks if she can do anything to help him. And he stares at her and he says, "Are you real, or are you one of those?" And she says, "If you can't tell, does it matter?" And I think that's a question which is going to haunt us as we go into this next phase of healthcare and of society. If you can't tell the difference between a genuinely compassionate human carer and a very, very sophisticated simulation, a simulacrum, does that really matter? How much does authenticity matter? How important is authentic human empathy and compassion? I think there are lots of reasons to be concerned. Whereas previous versions of AI have been used particularly to control and dominate our attention, these new large language models are much more persuasive. There's a kind of pseudo-intimacy. And the potential for harm, I think, is enormous. Tragically, we're already starting to see... So this was a news item of a Belgian man who apparently had a history of depression, developed a very intense relationship with an artificial intelligence chatbot, and in the end committed suicide. And on going back through all the streams, it appears that the chatbot was all about climate change, and it was almost as though the chatbot was encouraging the man to end his life. And so finally, what is the ultimate goal of AI and digital technology in healthcare? What tell us? What are we aiming to achieve? What kind of world do we wish to create for our children? So this technical optimist vision of the future and of healthcare future, it seems that everything is going to become frictionless. Every desire, every longing, everything we want, it will be satisfied instantly and effortlessly in the techno-enhanced digital and virtual realms. But is this a future in which physically embodied human beings can flourish and find their ultimate purpose and fulfillment? And it seems paradoxically that in order for human beings created by God to develop and flourish, it seems that we need all the opposite. We need resistance, we need friction, struggle, perseverance, frustration, and pain. And so I think there are lots of reasons to think actually this wonderful techno vision of the future is also a dehumanizing one. It's one in which our humanity, we will become less than fully human because we are surrounded by a frictionless world. So what does it mean to be human? We are more than biological machines. We're unique and wonderful beings, persons made in God's image, but we're also fragile, dependent on others, threatened by disease, by the possibility of death. And I think a Christian understanding is healthcare is more than just a malfunctioning of the machine. It's actually our very personhood which is being threatened through disease. It exposes our embodied vulnerability. And that's why we need human friends. The human face of healthcare will always be essential. The physician and carer should be a wise human friend who comes alongside the patient in our need and our fear and our pain. And I think, therefore, as Christians, we're going to need to fight to maintain the centrality of physically embodied human-to-human interactions at the heart of healthcare, and other things like education, social care, local communities, and so on. And there's a kind of solidarity that the physician and the patient are both human beings. I am a human being like you too. I too understand what it means to fear, to suffer, to be exposed to terrible loss. I'm here to walk this path with you, to offer you my wisdom and experience and expertise, and to covenant that I will not abandon you, whatever happens. So I think, who knows what the future will be? I think we have to prepare ourselves for this disruptive future. And so some take-home messages. I think developing basic AI literacy is becoming essential for anyone. If you want to be working in healthcare in 5 years' time, you need to be developing AI literacy because it's coming whether we like it or not. I think within Christian circles and within ICMDA, we need to create working groups to monitor developments and work on ethical, personal, spiritual responses. We need to find other groups, the principle of co-belligerence. There are many other non-Christian groups out there who are concerned about these issues, and we need to work together. But I think we also need to pray. Beneath the glossy tech, I think we can see that there's a spiritual battle here about the ultimate nature of what it means to be human and what a human flourishing involves. But finally, don't be afraid. We can be confident that God's sovereign purposes are being worked out in history in surprising and unexpected ways. And we are all called to be faithful and servant-hearted bit players in the great drama, the two cities, Babylon and Jerusalem, and the ultimate triumph of the Lion and the Lamb. Thanks very much. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, John. Wow, what an amazing overview of a very rapidly changing subject. And we've got a time for question and answer now. I wanted to come back to you first of all, John, because your final slide was on resources. Just some thoughts from you about how have you managed to keep up with all these recent developments? You're doing a lot of speaking and writing and thinking in this area, but what have you found have been the most useful kinds of resources for keeping up with it?
Well, it is an extraordinary rate of change, and it seems like almost every week there are new developments. So it is quite a game keeping up with it. I'm finding Substack, those of you who may not have heard of Substack, but it's again, I'm going to produce a document with some links and so on, and I'm following a number of key players in artificial intelligence, and including those in the world of healthcare. And quite regularly they release newsletters up to the date, and with lots of links to original papers and so on. And I'm finding that an extremely powerful and useful way of keeping in touch. But this is why I think there's probably a role for some working groups that can do that filtering process, keeping watch on the developments and then filtering those and then making them more available to the wider community of healthcare workers and Christians.
Yes, and that's, I think, a challenge for ICMDA as well. We'll certainly be looking into setting up a global special interest group on this where we can keep up with the developments and as you say, do the curating, because no one can keep on top of everything. We all need the experts to help us. There's a question here from Lishawan Kumra in India. She's saying, how can medical schools better equip medical students for a world where AI is increasingly used in healthcare? And are other medical schools keeping up?
It's a huge issue for education generally, not just medical schools, because you really need to ask the question, how important is it for people to develop the rote, understanding and remembering 12 causes of an enlarged spleen and, learning the anatomy and so on, when these tools are becoming universally available. And therefore, I do think the whole question of medical education and education generally is being challenged. I think that giving essays for people to do at home is almost a waste of time because it's so easy for cheating to take place. If you really want to test someone's knowledge, you need to have them in a room alone, separated from any forms of technology, because it's the only way you can know whether they actually know anything. But I think
if you know they're a real person, of course, you have to know they're a real person.
You have to check they're a real person, yes. But I think that ultimately there's going to be a revolution in medical education, and the most important thing is to know how the technology works. I mean, that's happened before, hasn't it? I mean, medical education has changed in the past, and no doubt it'll change in the future.
But nothing quite at this mega level. Hugh Morgan is asking, GP in the UK, works with Prime Partnership in Medical Education. He's asking, do you foresee a day when consulting a doctor will not involve a human medic at all, just a medical AI that can access all your records and so on?
Yes, I do, I think, is the short answer, Hugh. I think there are a lot of people out there who that's their goal. I think everybody recognizes there's always going to be a place for some humans in the loop. There will always, and there'll be difficult and problematic issues that need to be passed up. But the proposition is that a large amount of the routine, the hack work that is done by doctors, to begin with, it will be the assistance of the AI will be there assisting you. But of course, every time you assist an AI, it's learning how you did it and improving on the job. And so when you work closely with an AI, it's also learning how to do you out of the job. So fascinatingly, what these recent large language models, when they've been introduced into businesses, what they've shown is the people at the top, the top experts get very little benefit from these systems. The people who really benefit are those who are a long way down. It's the incompetent ones, or the ones who are very ho-hum. Their level goes up a great deal, and so there's a kind of equalization goes on. And these systems are able to make very mediocre human beings function at a much higher level.
Oh, fascinating. So Uta Holbor is asking, how will AI justly manage the marginalized and less educated person? Is this going to be something where we'll see the equivalent of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer?
I think that's a very important point, and I'm afraid I think there's a real risk of that. There's a real risk of a kind of digital divide, that those who have access to this technology and who've got the intellectual ability to be able to use it are going to do better. Those who, for whatever reason, and as we all know in healthcare, there are many, many people like that who will really struggle. Having said that, there's absolutely no reason why technology can't be developed specifically for those people who struggle. And so I'm sure there's a role there for Christians to try to ensure justice, to try to ensure that rather than help the rich to get richer and do even better, that we should be orientating this technology to help to have it the greatest benefit for those in greatest need.
Mike Soderling is asking, since we as Christians believe that to care for the whole person, we must address not only the physical and mental, but also the spiritual aspects of humans who are suffering disease. How do you see AI technology addressing this, the spiritual issues that people present with?
Yes, and I think that's absolutely right. I think fundamentally, we believe that human beings are these holistic beings, and that the spiritual, the physical, the emotional, the social, these are all intertwined, and therefore addressing spiritual needs, the spiritual care of the patient, is absolutely vital. Sadly, so much of healthcare is now dominated by economic efficiency. And we as Christians and fellow travelers are going to have to make the case that spiritual care is economically valuable, because unless you can demonstrate better outcomes for patients who receive spiritual care, you will find it hard in a very hard-nosed technological healthcare system for that spiritual care to be valued. So I think that there is a role in trying to demonstrate the evidence. There is evidence, isn't there, that spiritual care, the whole care of the whole patient, I mean, this is something I know very much on the heart of Prime, that there is evidence that holistic care does improve patient satisfaction, it does improve patient outcome. We're going to have to make the case, I think, as Christians. But the other bizarre thing about this, and that is, these systems are capable of simulating spiritual care. They can simulate compassion. They can simulate the most sophisticated forms of interrelationships, of pastoral language, therapeutic, and so on. So part of I think the great danger here is the simulation of the most precious things, the things which we feel are at the very heart of our humanity. These systems will come along and will say, oh, we can simulate that very well. We don't need a real human being to do that.
And that leads us to the next question. It's an anonymous one, but just getting at this whole issue of mental health problems, and how could disembodied AI ever deal with anxious parents or a confused elderly patient? As saying, in my consulting room, patients have little interest in the technicalities doctors get so excited about. So I guess it's asking this question: how can you know that the person you're talking to is a robot when their responses are so apparently human? But mental health issues.
I think it's just important to understand how sophisticated these things are becoming. So yeah. In other words, you don't need any technical knowledge at all. You talk to this thing just like a human being, and it responds just like a human being, and that is why it's so powerful. I mean, it's not about technology. The technology is invisible. I just talk to this thing, and it talks back to me. And if I'm talking slowly, it adjusts its talk, and if I'm finding it difficult to understand, it makes it plainer. And so I think the interface is so seductive. It's so easy. It's so obvious, and that's both good and bad. I mean, it's good because it makes it accessible to absolutely everybody, including the most anxious. This thing can be the therapist who talks you down, only that therapist is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's there on your watch, or it's in your phone, or it's in your home. And it will talk to you constantly and remind you and help you with your CBT and your breathing exercises and so on. It is being claimed that mental health applications will be a very positive and major use for this technology.
So I guess taking the best counsellors all around the world and putting them together in something that you can't recognise as being not human.
So there's a fascinating paper, again, I'll put the link, where a whole series of people who had developed very intense relationships with companion AIs, and they were asked about what were the positive features, and they said number one was availability. This thing is available 24/7.
Yeah.
It never, our human friends fail to pick up, or they're distracted with other problems or whatever. My friend here, my artificial friend, is always available 24/7. But the other thing is, my artificial friend is completely non-judgmental. I don't have to worry what I say to it. I can be totally honest, and it will always be positive. It will always be sympathetic. It will always be understanding. And then they say, and actually, that feels better than this messy stuff of talking to real human friends.
Yes, indeed. So Shivam Natarajan is asking about the economic case. Shouldn't the extraordinary cost savings and efficiencies in AI and medicine alone be enough moral justification, given all the extraordinary challenges we face, and especially the issues around resource allocation, not least the availability of trained health professionals?
Yeah, well, I do think the economic justification is a very strong justification, but economics doesn't trump everything. It, in the end, it is preserving and human flourishing and becoming the people that we were meant to be, we were created to be. That surely is more important than just having my diseases treated efficiently. And my worry is that this very technologically dominated healthcare will be efficient but soulless. It will ultimately dehumanize me as I'm healed. Yes, my physical health gets better, but as a person, I'm in some way being abused. I'm being abused by these healthcare magnates, by these tech millionaires, by the whole system, which just sees me as a product. And so by faith, I think I say that human interaction from a human wise friend who respects me, who loves me genuinely, who cares for me, who's compassionate, that is something which is worth an economic cost. That's, I think, the kind of argument that we're going to make. But it's not worth everything. I mean, sometimes we take hard choices and we say, yes, it would be nice to have a human being in the loop, but in this situation, it's probably better overall to go for the technological solution. But we should be constantly, I think, trying to support the centrality of this human-to-human interaction.
And that whole question of abuse is which you raised is an interesting one. And you told that chilling story of the man who'd been talked into assisted suicide by a chatbot over a period of months, presumably to help the climate problems in the world. And Mike Soderling is asking, this probably have to be our last question for reasons of time, but he's saying an interesting question is going to be the legal side of these things. If there's a bad outcome, for example, who will the patient sue, and how will accountability be built in to the system?
No, absolutely. It's a huge issue at the moment, and it's one of the things which is holding back this wholesale adoption. I think the technology is almost there. Concerns about the regulatory, legal accountability issues are very major, and they're complex, because you have a kind of three-way, there's the healthcare provider, there's the patient, but there's also the person who has the company who has created this technology, and
Yes.
dividing between legal responsibility. But this already happens. If as a doctor I use a syringe driver and the syringe driver has a fault and kills the patient, am I responsible, or are the manufacturers of the syringe driver? And the answer is, provided I, as the clinician, took appropriate care and responsibility, then the manufacturer carries responsibilities. And so I think these kind of issues will undoubtedly, there will have to be a lot of work on them. But I don't see them as a game, as killing the. I don't think it'll stop it. The power of the money is so strong that I think the law, the regulations will come into place for this specific application.
John, thank you so much. You've opened a huge can of worms, I guess, and we could go on talking on this for many hours, and I'm sure the questions are going to run and run, but you've given us a comprehensive overview to it today, and I'm sure people will be coming back to this webinar to run it through again, and we'll be fascinated to see how the whole thing develops over the coming months, and please pray that we can keep up with it at ICMDA, whether it's by putting together a global special interest group on this, but that we might become a channel for good information and how to help Christian reflection on the whole issue. So it just remains for me to thank you again, John, for your time, expertise, and input into this, for bringing us up to date, and to all of you for coming along today. May the Lord bless you, and we hope to see you soon on ICMDA webinars.